Good day. The topic which we will be reviewing today is ANOVA within the context of a study of employee motivation and work performance in Ghanaian mining companies. Now, what is ANOVA? ANOVA is a statistical technique which is utilized to establish analysis of variance. Now, this can establish the insights into the nature of the variable and the interrelationships between it. Now, we can usually calculate this to determine whether the population samples possess equal means. However, the purpose of ANOVA is to mitigate, if possible, given sufficient sample size, the differences existent within groups or the sample size between groups. Now, using this model, we can determine the emphasis on the overall spread of these groups within independent variables. Based on the spread and the different analyses which occur, we can assess certain impacts such as heteroscedasticity, homoscedasticity, and ascertain how they affect the model in terms of different things such as F-test, R squared, all these different deductions. Now, in the case of something as it relates to our study, employee motivation as it relates to intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and its impact on job performance and job satisfaction is tested based on levels of education. Usually within ANOVA, the different tests are used to determine any significance in terms of differences for demographic data. Within our study, SPSS was used to determine these different differences across intrinsic and extrinsic motivation as it relates to the mining sector across different levels of education. Usually, when testing ANOVA, certain assumptions are made, that is, normality, homogeneity of variance, and independence of samples. However, within our model, lack of normality was constant, alongside missing data from uncollected samples or if uncollected respondents. Additionally, there was an existence of potential type 1 errors across the different research design and research study. Now, this leads to problems within our estimation. Within our estimation, we can conclude that the mean, the F statistic, and the p-value was calculated. However, the correlation analysis was unconducted, R squared analysis in terms of goodness of fit was not calculated, and determining the overall significance or the different impacts of not conducting the other tests may have contributed towards the different errors within the model. Now, the goodness of fit usually indicates the variables proposed and how they actually explain the model itself in terms of the dependent variable. However, not having the data available to conduct these tests does not indicate how the explanatory variables explain the dependent variables. Additionally, ANOVA was conducted on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation as it relates to education factors. However, calculations or different impacts of correlation analysis could not be determined. However, the overall analysis in terms of significance was conducted based on SPSS. From this analysis, we can ascertain the overall impact and interpretation of each variable and identify group differences between variables. However, with the overarching effect of correlation, evaluation as it pertains to the different variables can be limited in terms of significance. From this significance, we can determine that intrinsic motivation is significant within the model because its p-value is greater than alpha, which is at 0.05. This means that the null hypothesis was rejected and no difference exists in intrinsic motivation from mining companies sampled. Now, in the case of extrinsic motivation, the opposite was found. Now, it was found that no significant difference in the scores on extrinsic motivation with respect to education levels was derived. Now, this is because the p-value was greater than alpha with a rejection at 5%. Now, this means that the null hypothesis was not rejected. And based on extrinsic relationship or the relationship between extrinsic motivation and education level, the means were all equal, which means that we cannot determine significance, or there was no significance within the model. Essentially, all the means are equal, which can create several problems because we don't know if this correlates back to our initial concern of correlation or normality issues. And this goes on to our next point of validity. As it pertains to validity, we can abstain that variance or analysis of variance is a traditional technique which can only be verified through repeat testing. Now we can identify that repeat testing was conducted based on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and the results from these replications can ascertain that a somewhat valid test was conducted, despite correlation errors which may have occurred or any disruptions from normality. What this means is that certain problems could have been rectified in terms of recommendations. Now we can ascertain that evaluating different covariates was a measure that was needed. Additionally, increasing significance levels through the assistance of our extrinsic motivation, which did not meet the null hypothesis, would help. Or additionally, we want to increase the power of the sample by increasing the sample size in order to get more data, and additionally accounting for covariance in terms of the impact throughout in terms of p-value and ability to deduce conclusion is sufficient.